Hi guys, welcome to React Native London. It's obviously June. Last time you saw us was a little while ago, but it's really good to be back. And yeah, we've got some really cool talks to present to you this evening. So first up, you might notice that I'm not Alex as the previous organizer. So yeah, there's been a bit of change of personnel here. So me and Arohan, who you'll hear quite a lot from later, have taken over the running. And yeah, we're really looking forward to getting engaged with you guys and continuing to make this awesome community grow and achieve cool things. So yeah, a quick bit about who we are as a company of running this. So we're Theodo, we're full stack software consultants. We run in agile and lean. We work with basically everybody from the first stage of startup to the biggest corporate you can think of. Obviously, we love React Native, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But we also love React, serverless, Django, and lots of other cool technologies. Reason why I mention this, partly because it's good to know who you're talking to, but also because we're hiring predictably in a meetup talk, you hear this. But yeah, if you like who we are and what we're doing, and particularly like Arohan's talk, come and chat to us. We're a friendly bunch, and yeah, we'll be more than happy to tell you more about what we do and how we are. Also, just as a side note, we're obviously still looking to improve and change and develop what we've already got, and we think it's a good formula, but obviously there's always room to improve. So we've got a QR code there for basically we've got questions about whether you'd like us to be in person, whether what talks you want to hear. We've also got bits there if you want to sponsor or speak at a meetup. We'd love to hear some more feedback from you guys, and yeah, really just want to know more about what the community's thinking and how we can best represent you as a meetup. I'll chuck this back up at the end, so if you've not had a chance to scan it, then obviously we can get to you then. So yeah. Obviously, first up this evening, we have Artur talking about his really cool UI library, UI Kitten, looking into its nexus and how it started, And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, if nothing else. So yeah, I think I'll pass you across to Artur.
People today here. I'm really glad to meet you all, guys, and I also want to thank all of you, especially the other company, for having me here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really always wanted to talk about today's topic, but I never had a chance to. So here I am, and my name is Artur. I'm working for a company called Acquia as a software engineer, building high-scale mobile applications with React Native. My previous experience is also based building native applications with Swift, Java, Kotlin, and everything else that you could just imagine. So at our company, we do lots of front-end related stuff, bringing our work to open source, and we really enjoy that. So yeah, once I opened the world of open source also for me, I just felt in love with React Native and its community. So that's why we are here today talking about one of the most exciting UI libraries that we have built, and I have had a chance to contribute to. It's UI Kitten and EVA design system. So the title of my talk is Dive into React Native UI Kitten, but because UI Kitten itself is actually a part of a bigger project, it's a part of design system, we are actually going to cover 3 topics today. And by the way, please drop a plus sign if you're already using those libraries in your app, so that I can have some analytics and be happy that you listeners are here listening to me. So first and first, we're going to dive into the ecosystem of EVA design and talking about EVA-related products and how we actually can use them in our app. Because I'm actually pretty sure that most of you guys have heard about UI Kitten, but not of the other cool stuff that EVA can provide. Next, I'm going to show you how we can actually use those products in our app to build more exciting and also moving user interfaces by making it more branded and customize it for the needs of our customers. And lastly, I also show you some of the great examples of how we can integrate some of the third-party libraries with our products. But before we start, let me tell you a quick story. So in this story, I would like to cover the knowledge, how had actually everything started. So I will be talking about how EVA design system was born. So back in 2018, Acquia, the company I'm working for, had already had several open source products and its demo applications. And that was actually great because we could use our own UI libraries to boost up our development process of like front-end apps. And by the way, those libraries were also used by other thousands of developers worldwide, so thank you. But there was actually one global issue that we really wanted to solve, and it was about, like, we didn't really have any single source of truth for our web and mobile applications, causing them to look different and inconsistent. So that's why we really started to look into possible solutions, and the only one we really saw was that we really should to integrate any sort of design system to our products. But we really didn't want it to integrate any existing solutions like material design, because we also wanted to create something new and fresh and also share it to the open source community. Well, yeah, we ended with a new layer of products, and so far this was an EVA design family, which actually consists of three products. So first one is a design system itself, available in both Sketch and Figma files. And to actually use it, you should just go to eva.design webpage, find that, and be able to download it for zero price. By the way, there are lots of other products that we also share. Well, yeah, so may actually find it here. So, well, yeah, that was about design system. It actually consists of a structured view of the components that we use in our UI libraries. And by knowing how it's important to follow the design rules in your applications, this was actually the reason why we made that for free. The second, the color generator, it's actually a tool where you can create an awesome color palettes for your app. So being a developer, I always know how it's painful to pick the right colors for your application. And well, the color generator doesn't care about it at all. So it only wants you to pick one primary color and do the rest of the things for you. So yeah, be just sure, 100% sure of the graceful color selection for your app, because it's actually a deep learning tool. So the last one, it's an icon package. We actually share up to, I guess there are around 500 open source icons created specifically for EVA, and don't skip on using them in your app just because it will make your app much more beautiful and user-friendly. So, by the way, those products were given on its start a product hunt achievements on this platform, so be sure of the quality we share for you. All right, I will not bore you anymore with product descriptions and all of the markets and stuff, so let's just jump into the code and see how can it work all together. But how do we start? So yeah, with UI Kitten, we actually provide 2 template packages available for React Native command line interface to start your project. Yeah, you may use both TypeScript and JavaScript template packages based on your preferences, but yeah, use TypeScript for better development experience, but we'll not start a holy war thread here, but okay. So to start your UI Kitten project, you should just copy and paste this simple command line to your terminal and run it, and that would be it. So yeah, once we initialize the project, we'll see somewhat like this. And this is actually my demo project. We can also interact with the slides like that to be sure that, for example, here we can just switch our theme from light to dark. Well, yeah. So let's jump to the code and see what happens there. Okay. So one of the most important things to understand in UI Kitten is that we wrap our entire application with application provider component, which is actually here. And we use that to pass through EVA styles for all of the nested components rendered within our app, specifically for UI Kitten components, such as buttons, inputs, and so on. Another cool thing here is that we can also define a theme for our app. So by default, it's light with standard blue colors of EVA, but we also made changes to dark like this. So let's see what happens here. Yeah, it works. It's very cool. And yeah, but let's say it's cool, but let's see what happens if we want to define more complex UI here. So here we see a sign-up form, which actually consists of two input fields. And here, let me change it to light back. We also see, in my example, a header image, which is actually kind of pinky colors. So let's try to build something custom for our app. Let's go back to our color generator tool. Let me find that. Colors. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we could just pick our branded color, download our theme with this export button as JSON, copy it to our code base, and that would be it. But actually, since I have already everything prepared for this demo app, let's just see how it works. So yeah, we just spread EVA light theme. And we add our sweet theme with pinky colors here to combine both themes. Oh, it didn't work. Yeah, should also apply spread operator. Yeah, this is how it will look like. Quite awesome, I guess. So let's jump to our demo view to see what happens here. I believe it's I could make it readable because I tried to place as less components as I could here. So it actually consists of inputs and checkbox and button here. But what is pretty cool feature of UI Kitten is that we don't really need to create separate text components just to define a label for our input. So kinda also can create a bottom line for this input just by creating just by passing the caption prop. So let's see how it works here. Caption test. No. Why? So, oh well, it didn't work for a reason. Caption. Let me try. Yeah, it worked. Cool, thanks. So, well, we also can place our captions, labels. That's really cool. But I hope that most of you guys are already familiar with such cool frameworks as Formic, which help us a lot for building validatable forms in React and React Native. So I use that here to demonstrate how can we actually integrate that with UI Kitten and validate our apps and present some maybe validation errors during the sign-up flow. So let's see how it works. So now we don't use any state-specific logic here. So we can just input our email and password here, but the checkbox is not pressable itself. I don't really want to use this React use state hooks here. So I built a hooks specifically for Formic use. Well, so here we may notice that we use Formic context, and the Formic context provides us values that user has right now on the screen. So in this example, when we, for example, will use our input, the value will be controlled fully by Formic. We also can provide the status prop to our input field to make it, let me show you actually, to make it interactable, presenting the current status of our input to let our users know whether it was failed to validate or something like that. So basically it works like this. We can say the validation was successful, but it didn't work. Well, let's try using Kitten. So we define our hook, which spells use input, and here we pass identifier for that field. So let's say it would be email, because we actually want to input an email, and we name it, let's say, email input. And say we actually will do for the password, which is password. And we also do the same for our checkbox, which asks us to accept the terms and conditions. So we call it terms, and terms checkbox. So what happens here is that our hooks returns as a configuration for our input fields and checkboxes. So this is actually a props, so we can use our email input and password input by spreading those to our inputs. Email inputs, and we'll replace that. So, password inputs. Terms checkbox. And we also want user not being able to press sign up button, so we say that it's not pressable. Disabled. While our form is not doesn't contain any valid values. Perhaps is valid. I guess it should work like that. Well, the button is disabled, of course, because we didn't input any email, which is required by U package, which provides actually a regular expression for our email, and it constantly checking it for the valid input, so that we can see the input field changes its status to a red one until we enter a valid email. So right now it's valid, it's cool. But we also require to input a minimum of 8 symbols password. So 123, 123, 12, 8. Okay, that's cool. The button still be still disabled because we don't accept the terms and conditions. We press that and boom. So here we got our form fully validated. And that's actually how we can integrate our UI Kitten components with format. So just to go through all of the steps one more time, we are actually able to use formic context, which defines our form values provided with formic. So why do we need an identifier for a field here? It's just because we can accept a proper field name through the formic values, because the formic values is actually an object, and we, let's say, can accept the email field like this. But since JavaScript provides us another way, we can accept that through the identifier. And what we say is that our input field should have a danger status until it's valid. So if formic has some errors and if errors doesn't apply for a current value which is not defined, then we should make it danger. And then we should also display a caption here. Wait a second, in this example it didn't work because we manually passed it to input. So to clarify, yeah, formic also uses a caption of our UI Kitten input field and pass the validation error to our caption. So that's really cool. And of course, we define our own change text property to set the current value to formic and to make it able to validate everything once again. Same applies to our checkbox. And finally, we can make our form validatable. So that's really cool. I really like this pattern of integrating UI Kitten components to Formic. I actually use this in the production app that I am currently working for. But let me show you another cool feature of UI Kitten. So since we are able to use a theme for that to define the colors, but what if we can we actually want to define the same way font family for all of the text displays in our app? It's just quite simple. We should just need to define our mapping and say, hey, mapping, please use text for font family for that. Text font family. And I actually have a special font for that, which I really love, Sarah. And yeah, just to clarify. Yeah, so by refreshing our app, we see that it was applied, which is cool. And how it actually works is that our UI Kitten connects to Metro Bundler, and with a simple configuration of our app, we define the path to custom mapping.json, which was actually used during this presentation. And it's constantly watching for changes in this mapping.json. And once it sees that we defined our text font family, it will apply it for all of the components used in our app. Of course, if we use text from UI Kitten. So another great example would be a border radius, such as we can also define a border radius that should be used globally in our app. Let's try and make it 8. Everything is quite rounded, I'd say, but let's try maybe bigger. Yeah. And we also can make it square by passing 1. Well, this is something that I really like. Well, yeah, that was about an example of usage of UI Kitten. So, yeah. Just to summarize all of that, let me explain why do we actually need to rely in UI kits in our app. So to answer this question, let me show you one screenshot of the app that I had a chance to build for a startup company which specializes in medical services and veterinary. So this is the screenshot of our first phase when the app got actually released. And this is how it looks now. So I had a chance to build that for less than 2 months, of course, for its first iteration. And now the entire code base contains more than 50 screens, which is actually really cool. And what did it make it so profitable and successful for business to grow is that the customer actually didn't rely that much on building user interfaces. And it helps us a lot to not focus on building user interface, but rely and try to build as much business logic as we could that time. So to summarize, the usage of UI kits and heavily relying on the design rules gives us, first of all, consistent user interfaces. The second, by reducing our development efforts, we also reduce the cost of front-end development for our customers. And the last one, it gives us a possibility to focus on the important things, on not just building UI blocks. Yeah. So, well, that was it, I guess. Thank you for watching. I hope you will build awesome user interfaces, and I hope you really enjoyed the talk. And I could share you as much information about EVA-related products as I could. So you can find me on Twitter if you want. It's presented at the slide below. at the bottom of the slide. So please approach me if you want. And yeah, if you have any questions, please write them in our chat so I can answer them. So thank you.
So yeah, so thank you, Artur. That was great. I really enjoyed learning more about UI Kitten. We especially haven't used it a bit before, and it's really I agree that it really does speed up things. I actually had a quick question from myself actually, which was, what was your favorite component to build?
You mean the component that we could actually import from UI Kitten, or you mean the custom components?
From UI Kitten.
Well, I don't really know. I prefer building really something custom, relying on inputs, because I just recently realized that at the phase of development of UI library itself, we focused that much on making it compatible with web platform. So, but on the mobile platform, it didn't really look so nice. For example, when you try to build a complex form, let's say select fields, popovers, and things like that, because it's built with web in mind. I really prefer this bottom sheet stuff, when it's much more easier to interact with, especially on mobile. So to answer your question, I really like to interact with inputs because it's so much configurable and we can build so much with that, especially like autocomplete fields. By the way, I had recently a chance to make a proper field for that. So yeah, I hope I answered that.
Yeah, 100%. I think, thank you for the autocompletes as well. I'm sure they'll be very useful.
I had a question as well, if you don't mind, Artur. Thanks so much for your talk. It was really, really interesting, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who've learned a lot of stuff. The question I had is, if I've started a project already and I haven't used Eva or UI Kitten, and suddenly I want to use it now, what's the first thing that I should try and implement? Is it the colors? Is it text? Is it something else?
Well, the first thing would be actually pretty the same. So you should go through the steps of like npm install scripts to download our UI Kitten and Eva packages. The second and most important, that you should actually wrap your entire code base in our application provider so that you are able to use UI Kitten components and styles from Eva. And if you want to go next with like using your custom branded colors, you should just define your theme like I explained in my slides. So yeah, I would say the steps are pretty similar for both cases, so for both scenarios.
Amazing, thank you.
So yeah, we had a couple of questions from YouTube. So keep firing them in. We'll get to them after we've answered these ones. So we've got from Ilias, what would be the best way of making the theme changeable by the user? From I think your approach with the different themes.
Well, I can be sure I heard you properly. So could you maybe just repeat the question?
Yes, sure. So with the approach you're taking with the pink colors coming through, what would be the best way of making that theme changeable by a user, like within their application?
Yeah, the runtime timing is also, of course, supported. So once, of course, if you are able to like pass the props manually by switching light and dark themes and playing around with that, you for sure are able to do that by pressing a button or things like that. So for example, we can just rely on a hooks logic or things like that. So basically the way you should do that, or you can do that. So you should just handle, of course, obviously, button press event. And maybe the second step would be saving somewhere or storing the value of a currency. I don't actually prefer like storing the whole, the entire object of a theme. So you shouldn't do that. But you may actually store an identifier for your themes, saying like it's light for now, okay. But once we press the button, we could just compare this identifier to other identifiers. So let's say we support both light and dark themes. We just compare our light to dark, and if it's not dark, we should just store the dark value, and other logic is just just a question of how you manage the state.
Cool, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the next question is from Mobile Management Loyalty Platform. It's an interesting name, but how can you add gradient colors to buttons?
How can I upgrade the colors of buttons?
To gradients to buttons.
Oh yeah, that's a complex one. To answer that, I should honestly say that I never had the chance to try it, but I guess there is an npm package on GitHub called React Native Linear Gradient or so. So I really hope that it should work for UI Kitten. So to answer this question, there are two ways of how you can change the properties of and colors of UI Kitten components. So for example, in this case, with button, I guess linear gradient could provide you something like a hashed value or thing like this. And you could actually pass this prop to our UI Kitten components. So for example, if we pass a red color or hashed color, so hex color, to background property of a style, it will be applied with UI Kitten. It will ignore completely the theme, of course, because the user value is more important than theme. So I guess it will also work with gradient.
Oh yeah, I think that would be cool to see as well. So the next one is how can you compare? Sorry, this is from Dante. Can you compare this UI library with the most popular React Native UIs like Native Base and other UIs?
Native Base. This is an interesting question. So, well, what I would like to say, being a maintainer of UI Kitten, is that when I had to build specific component, let's go with the simplest one, a button, I of course try to do a basic research and go through all of the libraries that I could find. And what I dislike about other libraries is that they actually provide lots of properties for a developer, and you basically need to go through the documentation to find a way you could actually pass an icon to a button or things like that, because there could be a set of properties and they are actually really mixed together. So with UI Kitten, comparing those, I actually really like the API we provide. So in most cases, for example, to pass any component, any nested component to specifically a button, you should just actually type something like accessory left or accessory right. And this logic applies, this API applies for most of our components that we have built. So this is actually what I really like comparing to our API to libraries, to other APIs from other libraries. Yeah.
So it's the consistencies of your APIs that really set.
Mm-hmm. And of course that we rely on the design system. And yeah, I know that also React Native paper is built really cool. I also like their APIs, and of course they rely on material design. So yeah, we could compete with them, of course, but I will not compare that because we are running completely different design systems. and I like both actually. So as I mentioned before, I had a chance to build native mobile applications before, and I also fell in love with material design, building Android applications. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm too a fan of material, but yeah.
And UI Kitten, of course.
Yeah, of course. The last question that I've got, which is maybe the most important of the evening, is can we see the cat?
A cat?
The UI Kitten itself.
Yeah, sure. It's running like in corners right here. So what was it providing sounds? Yeah, so you hear that? Sure. So
we can see where you get your inspiration
from. Here is actually a UI Kitten. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Artur. I think that's all the questions we have. But yeah, thank you again for a great talk and super interesting journey that you've gone on.
Yeah.
So yeah, now we'll go over to Arohan, speaking about his fitness app and how he created a better UX for his users in a very particular use case that I know he'll definitely dive into.
Hey guys, thanks for coming to the React Native meetup today. My name's Arohan, and I'd like to talk to you guys about building intuitive components for an interactive fitness app. First, a little bit about me. I'm a full stack developer at Theodore UK, and we are hiring. So if you're watching this live or remote online later at some point on YouTube, maybe do get in touch. And I specialize mostly in React Native, and Django as well. The product that I want to talk to you guys about today is slightly different from most of the product that we usually do, and so I'm super excited to get started. The app in question is the myArc Fitness app. So myArc Fitness is an app for fitness content creators or influencers and their followers to essentially train together in one place. So as a fitness content creator, I can go onto the myArc website, sign up, and then create different workouts and workout plans for my followers. And then my followers can then download the myArc app, go through there, select me as their favorite trainer, and then complete workouts in the app. There's quite a lot of different features as well in this app. So, a dashboard to track your progress and your stats. There's video tutorials, notes, and there's also a nifty sort of rewards-based gamified system so that premium subscribers can get discounts on real-world products as they complete workouts. So it's a pretty feature-heavy, feature-rich app with a lot of different sort of things, but the most important part of the app is the Workout Now feature. So the Workout Now feature is essentially the place on the app where users spend most of their time. And this is where they go to complete workouts that the influencer has sort of set them. So here, for every sort of exercise in a workout, we have a different screen. As you can see on this video that I've just got from their Instagram. And we have the exercise name, the number of reps, and the amount of weight that you need to lift, if any. And you can have exercises that are either rep-based or time-based, as you can see here. We also take into account any rest time that users need to have in between exercises or different sets. And everything is essentially taken care of so that you can follow along, even if you're a complete novice. When we initially designed the section, this is what it looked like. So we have the exercise name, reps, weight, and then the section towards the bottom where you can sort of navigate and edit what you've done. And the initial feedback wasn't great. Users said that the bottom section especially was a little bit cluttered. The previous button was not used very often, which kind of makes sense in hindsight because you wouldn't go back to an exercise that you've just done. It was also prone to accidental taps because of the way that users interacted with the app. So often they'd sort of pick up the app, see what they needed to do, put down their phone, complete the exercise, and then pick up their phone again. So in between, successive picking up and putting down of the phone, their fingers could often accidentally touch one of these buttons and then sort of trigger things that they didn't want to be triggered. So that was another issue. The edit mode was also pretty unclear, and it wasn't very intuitive. And in fact, 40% of users did not describe the workout now section as intuitive and easy to use. So this was a real problem that we faced. We knew that other fitness apps did something similar and had a lot of the same sort of buttons of editing and next. And we really wanted to do something different. So, even though we took on the feedback and, we got rid of the previous button, we replaced it with an edit button, we got rid of the icons, and before that tried a bunch of different icons for edit mode. We really wanted something quite, starkly different to what was the current state of the art and what we see in a lot of fitness apps. And to the product team, it was super important that the MyArc app was known for its intuitive, easy to use design. So for inspiration, we looked to the principle of skeuomorphic design. So skeuomorphic design is essentially the idea of designing UI components to mimic the real world. So, a great example of this is the UI that came out the very first iPhone and first few iPhones. As you can see, all the icons on the left have shadows and reflections and look beveled and kind of replicate real life buttons. And I think in addition to this, as you clicked on these, the phone could maybe vibrate or have a sort of click or a different kind of sound to basically feed back to users that they were actually clicking on buttons. And this was super useful because during the time that the first iPhone and smartphones came out, people were moving from having a lot of buttons and having that sort of tactile feedback to just tapping things on a glass screen. So this is where skeuomorphic design really helped people to navigate iOS devices especially. And of course, over time, as people got used to tapping buttons and using smartphones, we moved back to a sort of flat design that you see on the right hand side, where there's a lot less shine and bevel and things like that. And I think a particular example of this is I think the biggest difference between the two sides is probably the Instagram app. If anybody remembers what the Instagram app icon used to look like, on the left we literally have a 3D logo of a sort of camera, and then on the right it's just completely abstracted away. And I think for the time, I think both these logos are pretty good for what they wanted to achieve. Another example of skeuomorphic design, which I, having talked about it, I absolutely couldn't pass up on describing, is Logic Pro X's interface for instruments. So Logic Pro is a software that musicians can use to produce music. And of course, you can select a range of different instruments on there. And the amazing thing is, if you select an organ, and this works with a few other instruments on there, and you want to change the settings of this device, you actually come up with an interface that looks like an actual organ that you can sort of change things on. And I have an example of it here, which is pretty cool. So as you can see, I can change the dial up and down as I want, toggle switches, and change a lot of the other settings as I wish. And I'm not a professional organ player at all, so I don't really know what I'm doing here, but you can see how if you were a organ player who had played for quite a while and wanted to move into the digital space, this would be incredibly easy and intuitive for you to pick up. And so this is the kind of thing that we really wanted to replicate going forward. For our specific application, what we looked at was the very, very original iOS lock screen, where we have this slide to unlock feature, which I think is, one of the, original iconic designs that I think we all probably remember. So with this slide to unlock feature, you have the text that tells you to slide to unlock something. And you also have the lovely sort of springy feel, because if you don't unlock, if you don't slide all the way, it springs back. And if you get to a certain point, then we have the click sound, if people remember, that then unlocks the iPhone and then you can get in. So we wanted to implement something like this that would give users the feel that they were unlocking each exercise as they went on to the next. But it was also super important to the product team that users could just as easily edit any exercises that they were currently doing, because it was super important to them to have accurate data and have users be able to accurately track their own progress. What we essentially wanted was a slider that slid both ways, and that's where the double slider component sort of came in. So you can slide to the left to then toggle edit mode and change things on the app, and then you can slide to the right to go on to the next exercise. And what was great about this is it had an intuitive design. It had the helper text as well that you can see with the save and the next or the edit. It followed the principles of skeuomorphic design, And my personal favorite, it didn't involve any buttons. So there was not the classic, edit button or the next button that we see on a lot of other fitness apps. Once the design was initially done and we agreed on it, we started to look online to see if we could find anything in terms of pre-built components that existed. And we couldn't find anything for this double slider specifically. So we decided to make our own. Now, on top of this, speed was a priority. We were, really prioritizing getting quick feedback and iterating in feedback circles kind of quickly. So the team went to use a library that they were very familiar with, which is the React Native animated library, which is inbuilt and comes out of the package with React Native. Let's have a look at some code examples. To start off with, we just needed to set up our container and our toggles. So the container I'll refer to as this sort of gray pill that you see in the background. And then the toggle is this purple circular item that you can scroll back and forth. There's not too much special going on in terms of code here, but it's just there so that you guys know as I refer to the container and the toggle, that's what I'm referring to. The next step is when we start to get the animations in. With React Native's animated library, there's two things that you need to set up generically for any animation. One is an animated value, some sort of value that changes as the UI thread renders. And two is a panhandler or some sort of gesture responder. So something that essentially can track taps or can trigger handlers that can track as you tap on a screen and then feed that back to whatever component you need to. So we have the animation set up for this, and then we sort of implement it in the component. So let's have a look at the animation setup first. So as I mentioned, you set up an animated value, and then you set up this pan responder as well. And the most interesting part of this pan responder here is the on pan responder move and the on pan responder release functions. So as the pan responder moves, we have access to this gesture state, which essentially tells us how far the thumb or a finger press travels in all directions. And we've taken the dx value here and we set it to this animation value every time the pan responder moves. So for every frame that it moves. And then we have the on pan responder release function, which is triggered, as you guessed, when you let go of the pan responder and your thumb press or finger press comes off the screen. And when this happens, we want to set this value back to 0, which is where we initialized it as. The plan is to use this value to replicate the X position of the toggle as you move it left and right. We also have this use native driver true option that we pass into the config. As some of you probably know, React Native runs on two different threads, the JavaScript thread and the UI thread. The JavaScript thread is usually used for all the main renders and the sort of logic that you have in the app, and the UI thread is used for the animations mostly. I mean, I'm abstracting here, but generally that's what it is. And using use native driver equals true means that all the animation logic can be run on this UI thread, so it makes your animations performant, essentially. And one of the drawbacks to this is you can't always have use native driver true for everything. And I think you can for this animated spring function, but not for pan responder functions. And so, that's a whole different talk as to which animation library is the best. But for now, that's what use native driver does. Next, we have the component setup for this interactive toggle. We essentially take the pan responder's handlers and we pass it into this animated view object that we can wrap around our toggle component. And then we take the animation value that we had defined and pass it into the translate X attribute, which then transforms the toggle to move left and right as you press left and right and drag left and right, I should say, on the screen. So that's how we get the basic animation of the double sliding spring. Next, we have the text opacity. As you can see, there's this edit and next text that we have that obviously tells users how to slide in terms of editing and going to the next. And what we wanted was, as you scrolled, that this text disappeared because we didn't think it would be a great UI sort of functionality to have toggles sliding over some text that you could still see or still read. So once again, we first set up the animation and then we implement it in a component. This time, the animation setup, again, it involves an animated value, but the functions are slightly different. We have this on pan responder grant. So this is triggered every time you tap on the pan responder or the toggle in this instance. And we want to set this value of label opacity to 0. And then when we release the pan responder, we want to set the value back to 1. And as you can see, with these functions, we couldn't use the native driver, which is why the native driver has been set to false. It's just a gotcha of the library. Then we've got the component setup, where we use this animated text component that you can again get from the React Native animated library. And this time we pass in the label opacity to the opacity attribute of the text. So then as we tap on the toggle, the text becomes transparent. And then as we release our hand, the text becomes opaque once again, and you can see it. Finally, we've got this extra descriptive text that we also wanted. So you can see it says next exercise or edit exercise. And essentially what we wanted to do with this is couple the transparency of the text to the X position of the toggle as you slid it back and forth. So for this, we needed to use the interpolate function provided by React Native's animation library. And this interpolate function here, as you can see, essentially takes one animated value, takes the current value that it is, and maps it to another animated value. So here we're mapping the animation value to the left text opacity, and here we're mapping the same animation value to the right text opacity. What we're essentially saying is, as this value goes between 0 and 75% of half the slider width, so that would be at the rightmost position, we want the left text opacity to go from 0 to 1, which essentially means as we slide to the right, make sure that we can see the text on the left. And then we have the exact opposite here, which is as we slide to the left, make sure that we can see the text on the right. Once we've got that, we can take the left and right text opacity values, and again, as we've just done before, pass it into the opacity attribute of an animated text, style it accordingly so that it's in the right position, and then we've got this ready to go. There was also a few other things that we did and we chose to implement. So there were toasts at the top that let you know when edit mode is on, obviously toggling edit mode itself, and also some circles that let you know where to swipe to, because obviously if you don't swipe all the way, then you don't get there. You don't get to toggle each trigger. Putting this all together, we finally had the final component, which looks something like this. So you swipe to the left and you can edit the exercise. You had the toast that comes up at the top that tells you the edit mode is on. You can toggle, you can use the plus and minus buttons to change how much weight you lifted. And then once you're done, click next to go on to the next exercise. And your changes are saved as well. Once we implemented all of this as required, I think over the course of a few days, we went out and did beta testing with the same users. And it was great to see that 90% of the users now actually reported the Workout Now section as intuitive and super easy to use. And I think every user, even those who didn't list the Workout Now as super intuitive, said that they really, really like the slider, and it's one of the main attractions that they had at the app. And to be honest, I kind of see why that might be, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but swiping left and right as you complete exercises or as you want to track your progress more accurately is a really good feeling for users to be able to sort of unlock the next exercise. So that was the reason behind it, and that's what we did. And that's how we essentially tackled the problem of making the Workout Now section of the My Arc Fitness app intuitive and easy to use. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Arohan, for that great talk. Particularly enjoyed the story of not only that you improved it, but you noticed there was a problem with how you found problem areas in your application that you could actively help users to use your app, for want of a better word. I particularly wanted to ask one question, which was are there any refinements you'd be looking to make in the future for your slider?
Sure. Not at all. Thank you for having me, firstly. Yeah, obviously, as I mentioned during the talk, we had some time constraints and we really wanted to build things, quickly, get user feedback, build the next part and move on. But in terms of improvements, probably the first thing that we could do is in terms of the animation libraries used. So we use the animated library. The name of the library is animated, and it comes straight from React Native. And it's great for most things and getting things built fast. But if you want to have a few more high performing animations, and a lot of them especially, then there's a great library called Reanimated. It's a little bit confusing because it sounds almost exactly the same. But there's a library called Reanimated, and I think they have a version 2 of it out now, Reanimated 2. The syntax is a little difficult to understand at first, but after you've had a go at their examples and tutorials, you can build pretty much the exact same thing, but far more performant. Which obviously means once you start scaling, once you start having more complicated animations, you can still kind of run everything alongside your logic without really having any issues. So yeah, that's where we'd go next is probably apart from building out new features and maybe making implementing UI Kitten maybe. Apart from that, I think we'd go for rebuilding the entire feature in Reanimated, which would make it more performant. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Be cool also maybe to see haptics as well. Obviously, it's part of the skeuomorphic design you were talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, performance is always a key, especially with React Native because you're doing so much. So I've got a few questions from the audience. So we've got one from Harshal saying that he loved the he loved the iterative approach. But he was asking how long did it take to build it?
Sure. So I mean, if you have knowledge of the library, you can probably build this in a few hours. And I think for beginners who haven't touched animations before, you'd probably take maybe a couple of hours to get used to the concepts of a gesture responder and an animated value. There's tutorials online and there's docs and things like that. But once you have your head around those concepts, yeah, it will take a few hours and at most a day or so to build this out. And once you've built it out, you can go ahead and make the performance improvements as well. So yeah,
it's good to hear. So Karina was also asking which other animation libraries could you use? Obviously, you mentioned Reanimated. Are there any others that come to mind? Or?
Not so much. Reanimated is really the main one. But maybe I can explain a bit more about why it's better in terms of performance. So to explain the situation very simply, there's two main threads that React Native runs on, which I think people will be aware of. One is the JavaScript thread, which runs all your business logic and your screens and everything else in the app. And then the other is the UI thread, which runs all your animations, or is supposed to run all your animations. So with the JavaScript thread, every time it runs, you have a re-render of the app. So if you console log something and you run it on the JavaScript thread, every time you change something in your animation, that thing will get console logged. But the UI thread runs independently of this, which means if you try and console log something and you have an animated component and you move it around, even though the component is moving left to right, the console logs won't come through because that's running on the JavaScript thread. So because of that, the UI thread handles all the processing if you use the Reanimated library that I mentioned. And so it's a lot more performant and you're not limited by how many renders you can do essentially.
I've definitely been caught out with the console log problem before. So I've got another one from the mobile membership and loyalty platform. Couldn't you use interpolation for labels opacity in the first place and only have one animated value instead of two?
Sure. So that's a good question. And if we had done that, the result that we would have had is as you slide the slider to the right and left, you would have the label opacity for the next and edit text slowly diminishing from fully transparent, as a gradient, and it will go to fully opaque, and it will slowly go down to transparent. But what we exactly wanted was an immediate switch from, opaque to transparent for that specific text. There is a way around it, I guess, with interpolation. You could have set limits, but interpolation is generally used when you want to go, from one value to the next in a smooth way. We generally just wanted to go, spend 25 milliseconds and just go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, transparent to opaque. So it didn't make sense for that use case, but it is possible, of course, to do that.
Cool. So I think the last one we got is from Vihaga, saying how to manage font sizes on both Android and iOS. Do we need to think about pixel density before defining a font size? You mentioned particularly font size is 23.
Cool. Is that in relation to any of the font sizes mentioned during the talk? I'm not sure if I mentioned something.
I would imagine it would be part of styling.
Okay, cool. Well, I'd say in terms of managing font sizes on both platforms, I think it varies from device to device. And I think the best bet you can have is make sure that you test on a lot of devices, your app, and always take accessibility into consideration. It's something that we forget a lot to do because, we test on our device when we're, developing, or we test on a simulator and it looks fine, great, let me move on to the next thing to build, right? But I think it brings to light a more important point to make sure you test on a lot of different devices. And if you do, then I think you should be able to account for all of those and then not have so many problems with sort of pixel density and ratio. Artur, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of reanimated, what I like too much about it is that it's backward compatible to default animated package from React Native, and I don't really use reanimated that much in our production app, but yeah, all I could say is just I rely mostly on the standard APIs on it. So could you please repeat the question about the font scaling or something you had been talking about? Because I'm not sure I get the point.
So when you set a static font size on in React Native, obviously pixel density between devices changes. So obviously then the text will be bigger or smaller depending on the pixel density of the device. So how do you handle that in a graceful way, particularly with the view of UI Kitten?
To be completely honest about this, we didn't care that much in our framework, but this is actually, I think we really started talking about internally in our team. And I did some basic research on that, and I found a great UI library called Size Matters or something like that. So it's heavily used right now, and we are really looking to implement some logic for this also in UI Kitten. So to answer this question, I would say it's not perfect. Our UI library is not perfect in this case. So if it does really matter for your app, we should just go through this topic again.
Well, I think that's all we've got, and thank you both for joining me. It's been really interesting, and I really enjoyed both the talks. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining as well. It's been a while, as I say. Yeah, we're really looking forward to doing more of these, and perhaps even in person at some point in the future.
Thank you, Leo, for hosting yourself. You're such a great host that I think I'm going to come next time as well, and I'll be here every time. You've convinced me.
Yeah, thank you, Leo, for the invitation. I hope to join another conference next time to talk about UI Kitten, maybe even more detailed, to provide some details on it, of course. So yeah, thank you for having your time and having me here, and yeah, hope to see you next time.
I'm looking forward to it.